All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Just a couple more people filtering in here, so we'll give them another minute or so. Hope that everything's going well on your end, wherever you may be. All right. And could I just get a thumbs up if you're able to see my screen? Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll get started, and then if more people pop in, I might just have to take a second to let them in. Good morning. So my breakout today is the Uncharted C and GPT because I like rhymes. We're going to keep school districts afloat in the age of AI, or at least do the best we can to do that. My name is Chris. I am an innovative education facilitator with the Durham District School Board. And that's our X handle, I guess. I still want to say Twitter, but it's at DDSB Innovation. Our board policy is to make sure we do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of a meeting, so I'm just going to do that right now. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. All right, so the way I kind of structured this today is I thought we could, read the room and try to get a bit of context for, my experience, and hopefully folks can pop some information into the chat about their own experiences as well. And we're going to take a look at some real and perceived barriers or difficulties. So what are we messaging out and how are we doing it? And then some proposed solutions, focusing a lot on UDL. All right. So love to see folks from all over the place. This is fantastic. So cool. Okay, so where is Durham District? So we are just east of Toronto. Toronto's probably about a half hour, 45 minutes from where I live. And if you look at the map here, it sort of covers all the way up to this area and down here. So it's like this kind of loop right here. So it encompasses quite a wide range of different areas. We got a lot of rural farming communities up here, and then some more urban and suburban areas closer to Lake Ontario. My department is a central department. It is called the Innovative Education Department. What we do is we partner with staff across the system. Sometimes we do some training of the staff. Sometimes we work with students directly. For example, if we're training them how to do video editing or something along those lines, we would do that. Also, we do a lot of partnering with teachers, co-planning, co-teaching, and the like. The cool thing about this position is that it gives me sort of a sense of where the system is. I was a K-8 teacher prior to this, and I was limited to one school's perspective. So it's really neat that now we've got 138-ish schools on the board. We have 80,000 students, so it's really a great opportunity to kind of see what's going on in the system. And then I am aware that particularly in the United States, I think a lot of your school boards are a lot smaller, right? Like the 80,000 is probably on the larger end, if I can just get a sense from the chat. Okay, 47,000. Yeah. So yeah. It's okay. And Tony, where's that? Frederick, Maryland. Okay, cool. Okay. So yeah. So it's a fairly big board, and lots of different different areas there. 29,000. Okay. So yeah, definitely on the bigger end. And so the temperature of the system with respect to AI is very, very much varied. I'm assuming that many of you will probably have the same perspective that lots of people are doing lots of different things. 1,500 students. Wow, that's quite small. Okay, so how are we communicating information out? So our department, since we do a lot of leadership in the area of innovation and teacher training, we have a variety of different ways that we're communicating this information out. So we do have some online and in-person PD that's happening. Often administrators will request our department to come in for example, a staff meeting, or we do some central PD as well at the board office. Additionally, sometimes we will offer training directly to administrators, particularly on this AI. We also have a departmental newsletter that we send out. There's a role in our board called the ETL, Educational Technology Lead, and that's on a school by school basis. We send out a letter to those folks, pretty much every quarter or so, and we're able to kind of communicate some hot button issues with them there. We also have an on-demand option. We have sort of an online PD course that's available for teachers to take a look at. And if anyone wants to unmute, if you have a different, really cool way of sharing information with your system, I'd love to hear it because we're always looking for new stuff. Okay, so some similarities there, Nancy. Thanks. Great. Okay, moving on. So let's take a look at some of the the barriers that we have. So in terms of our board, we have something called the technology approval process, or TAP, and that is a bit of a hiccup because every piece of software that uses personally identifying information, particularly when it comes to students, needs to go through TAP. And I would wager that many of your boards have a similar type thing. So there's a variety of folks that are involved in that process. Our department's involved in it, and then our IT department is also involved with it, and they take a lot of the user experience and security investigations when we see a new technology. So where that comes into play with AI is that none of the AI tools that are really out there right now are approved through TAP. And so at the risk of endorsing, we don't want to be endorsing a particular technology. And so, it's one teacher education piece that we've had to take a look at is, how to kind of speak about generative AI in a kind of general sense, rather than saying, you can use ChatGPT to do this, or this is how we teach students to use ChatGPT. Ideally, we would be saying, okay, students, here's how you can use ChatGPT ethically. But because it is not approved, we can't be, endorsing that particular technology. But there's nothing stopping folks from doing it in a kind of more general sense. And what is great about that is when the next, big AI tool comes out, hopefully those conversations will still be applicable because, if we've spoken generally enough, we should be able to, have space for the new things that come out as well. All right. So another major barrier, of course, is the academic dishonesty piece. And there is a lot of discomfort in the system with students having access to this software, and the teachers don't feel qualified or allowed to talk about it publicly, like with respect to TAP. And so one thing that we are trying to really encourage again is those sort of general conversations. And even though you can't say ChatGPT to say, hey, when would a generative AI tool be okay here? When might it not be? And I'm sure many of you are following a similar thing, similar experience where, tried and true methods of assessment are quickly becoming liabilities. So like essays, classic text, those are quickly becoming, if not obsolete, then definitely liabilities. So this is a big problem, and especially in the 7 to 12 area. One thing that we I try to like communicate to staff is where do they fit on this, continuum. Basically, student use of this technology is always dishonest. Student use is they should be free to use it at all times. And it's kind of important for people to realize, hey, there's different parts on this continuum. It doesn't have to be an either or situation. Seeing here like a lot of staff only, but we know students are using it at home. And yeah, absolutely, learn how to leverage that for students to learn rather than not just get answers. I love that, because that's true. Like it's such an important tool, and especially as we move forward into the future, students are going to really like companies are going to be looking for students who can do this. Interesting, Nancy. If you can if you could somehow share with me, I have my email address at the end of the thing, and I'd love to see that list if you don't mind. That'd be fantastic. But no pressure. Okay, so yeah, seeing that continuum reminds folks that it doesn't have to be an either or situation, and there may be situations where you say, students are free to do this at any point in this assignment, but on the next assignment, it might be a dishonest thing, and folks need to know that there's space for them to move around on that continuum. It doesn't have to be static. Okay, in terms of another barrier that folks are coming up against is the need or perceived need for a checking tool. Now, maybe some of you have had different experiences. I'm going to say that a lot today. I'm realizing I'm sounding like a broken record here. And that's kind of the whole point of this conference, right? So we can kind of see what other folks are doing. But we have a sizable cohort of folks who really are looking for a gotcha tool. They are uncomfortable with the fact that students are accessing it, either at school or at home via their devices. And we've had lots of requests for that. We have tested numerous checkers, and none of them have passed our process. Some of the key issues that we found with the checkers is they have terms of service that infringe on students' intellectual property. So one of the ones that's kind of a bigger one in the terms of use, it says the creation, distribution, transmission, public display or performance, and the accessing, downloading, or copying of your contributions do not and will not infringe the proprietary rights, including but not limited to the copyright, patent, trademark, trade secret, or moral rights of any third party. So if we're accessing student work and putting it into this tool, that's a third party, right? The student is the third party that hasn't consented to it. One of the other pieces of that is you are the creator and owner or have the necessary rights, consents, etc. So, I really like to phrase to folks that if they're using these checkers that are not approved, it's kind of opening them up for a liability and the board for a liability as well. We can only assume that no matter what the tool we're using, the tool is using our inputs to train its model. And so, there's a pretty big question about, should we be allowing a private business to be training itself on student information, right? So that's a real sticking point with the process as well. Now, I'm not sure if folks knew about this, but a lot of the checkers that have come up actually flag multilingual language learners at disproportionate rates to students who speak English as a first language. So I'll put in the chat a link to an article where, and I'll show you some of the graphs in just a second. So this is an article out of Stanford, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And then the last thing, they just don't work well. If any of you have tested them, I'm sure you have seen like false positives, false negatives, and especially when we're in situations where we're, making decisions that will impact students, academic careers. We have to have something that's going to work, right? Like it's not it's not in anybody's best interest to like, you know, flag somebody for academic dishonesty and it not actually be true. So this graph comes from that article I just linked. And so we can see here that these are different AI checkers that have been tested. And basically they had 8th graders write essays authentically. And in the red are students who are not English as a first language, and the gray are the students who are English as a first language. So you can see here, like originality.ai has flagged multilingual language learners at 76% of their essays were flagged as AI created, whereas 1% of English as a first language ones were. So here we have like an equity issue, right? A human rights issue. And again, it's you're flagging students at a much higher rate for for academic dishonesty that could have some profound implications. Interestingly, in the study, what they did was then they took the same essays and then with the English as a first language ones, they like simplified the language use. And with the students who don't speak English as a first language, they increase the complexity of the language use. And we can see here that it really flip-flopped, where now 99% of the English as a first language ones are being flagged and the MLL ones are being flagged at 12%. So it appears that a lot of them base their decisions on like word choice. Another thing, we do use one, Turnitin has a AI integration that we have approved, but we urged staff to not make major decisions based on it. We kind of urge them to use it as a starting point rather than I got you, right? So I thought that was a pretty interesting study and definitely kind of eye-opening for a lot of people when we share that with them. So another big concern that we're hearing a lot is that are we preparing students for the future? So we have a lot of people that like, if my students don't know how to write an essay, they are not going to be able to succeed. So and let's be honest, that's pretty upsetting. Like as an educator, you know, if you care about your job, you want folks to be leaving your class better for the experience, more prepared for the future. And so, a lot of people are worried, hey, like if students can just kind of use this technology, they're not going to be prepared for the future. We often find that in our panels, primary, junior, secondary, intermediate and secondary, that people like tend to try to prepare students for their future 20 years ago. So by that I mean, like, if I'm teaching grade 4, I'm kind of thinking, okay, what did grade 5 look like when I was in school, which was quite some time ago. But we find that happens a lot, like in 7, 8, all the way up to high school. And so when people are, we talk to secondary teachers, they're like, but when they get to university, they're going to have to do this, right? So one thing we want to let people know is, like, how are post-secondary institutions handling this issue? And we also say, hey, when you were a student, did your schooling prepare you for this? Because mine certainly didn't. I still remember like thinking about, why would anybody ever want video calling on their phone? Like the phone's going to ring and you're getting out of the shower and it's going to cause a whole bunch of problems. And then here we are, using Zoom and just doing like literal conferences based on that. So the other thing is that, pedagogical practices need to be updated. And this is seen as like a bit of an owner's task. It seems to be like a labor intensive thing. And yes, I use the Canadian spelling of labor. I'm sorry, folks. Oh, and now I apologize. So I'm just fulfilling all sorts of Canadian stereotypes right now. So which students are not being served as effectively as possible? Like that's a question that we need to be asking. And what does triangulation of assessment look like in this context? Not knowing where other boards are um, in terms of assessment practices, I do apologize if this is old news to lots of people, but it isn't for everyone. So when I say triangulation, we look at like conversations, observations, and product. At the high school level in particular, um, we see a lot of product being assessed, but not so much the conversations and observations. And so I love this graphic from the Hastings and Prince Edward District School Board, where it just kind of shows how three different students can be, assessed in three different ways. And so the student that's kind of like an equal balance between those. The student has more conversations guiding the assessment, and this one has more observations. And you can imagine all sorts of different constellations of how those things might look. The point we want to make with people is that there's more than one way to assess a student, and we can take a look at the conversations and observations, which are great especially if you suspect a student has been using AI, right? Those types of things are excellent tools for that. And Nancy, I would agree 100%. And we're going to kind of get to that in just a moment, actually. In terms of like what are post-secondary institutions saying, I picked a couple. I picked a couple like big ones in Canada. And in your area, you might want to think about what are the big draws for your school or your school district, and kind of look at their AI policies. So, like in terms of transparency, they're all kind of saying the same thing. U of T says like give the students clear instructions, let them know your expectations, right? Tell them what tools you can and can't use, exactly kind of in line with what we've been telling them. In terms of AI checkers, Dalhousie was very, their thing on AI checkers is actually pretty intense, but they're like, it's a violation of privacy. And all that sort of stuff. So it's good to know that there is some alignment with what our board is saying versus what the post-secondary institutions are saying. And I know like when you see three things here, it's like, oh, you cherry pick the ones that align. My reason for only picking three was because everybody was kind of saying the same thing, so I just kind of picked um, a couple ones that I like the wording of. And then in terms of pedagogical practices, apply accessible best practices in the classroom, such as UDL, Universal Design for Learning, which encourage diverse and student-centered means of engaging and demonstrating learning. So there's lots of different ways that we can kind of push people forward. And I think that this one of, okay, so you're worried about the future for students. What does that actually look like now? Because what it looks like now does not look the same as when we were, in school. And I find that validation is a huge superpower. I'm lucky enough to be married to a psychologist, and so like validation is just such a key skill, especially when you're dealing with folks who are, really upset or anxious about this sort of thing. So recently I went to a secondary space, and people are very, very concerned about it. And on my first interaction with this group, it was almost like kind of hostile. And I was like, okay, so well, I'm going in kind of like, ready for battle to, for the second one. And then I paused and I thought, no, like these people do not want an adversarial type of conversation. They want to feel like their concerns are valid, and they want to know that they're being heard. And we hear this all the time, right? And so I took the different tactic of going into that space and saying, okay, here's what we think you're worried about, right? Like if I were teaching, English grade 12, this is what I would be worried about. And instantly, as soon as like we opened the meeting like that, there's like it dissolved the tension immediately. So this like being able to sort of validate folks, I find it's almost like a superpower. It feels like you're playing with cheat codes or something. So if you take one thing away from this, please let it be that, validating folks is great. And you don't always have to, you don't have to validate the idea, but you can at least validate the emotion behind the idea and say, yeah, if I thought I wasn't preparing my students for the future, I would feel pretty crummy too. So just something to think about when you're interacting with folks, because I assume most of the people here are, district or, system leaders of some kind. So, in terms of responsible staff use, again, with the TAP process, we can't say, staff, go sign up with your board email. This is not something that we recommend. We do say you can use it. There's nothing saying you can't use it, but there's a couple guidelines that we really want people to be mindful of. The first one is the use of confidential information in these tools. And we, as I said before, we can only assume that whatever we're putting into these mysterious tools that are going to be used, they're going to be used to train the model later on. And what I don't want is for a principal, for example, to type in all this socioeconomic data about their school, trying to come up with a school improvement plan or something along those lines, right? And then when you Google that school in 5 years, historically the rates of literacy at the school have been abysmal, right? Like, so you want to make sure that you're not putting any sort of sensitive or confidential information in there, that sort of thing. The other piece is that personally identifying information, which is kind of along the same lines as the confidential information, but also like the ability to triangulate that information, right? So if you say, for example, I have a student in my grade 4 classroom who struggles with self-regulation and managing their temper. They have frequently, caused the classroom to be evacuated, whatever. If they have my username, right? If they have the school level and, from another conversation, right? You might be able to triangulate that information and say, oh, they're talking about this kid. I know that borders on the paranoia, but because we don't know how these things really work, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. The other thing is the whole equity and representation piece, and I've used like mainly AI generated images in this presentation. I'm using the DALL-E through Microsoft's Copilot for that. And just in terms of, as I'm sure you all know, like the default position of a lot of these AIs is Eurocentric. And so, if you ask for a student's favorite, write a short story about a student's favorite holiday, it's going to give you, Chris loved Christmas, right? Like it's never going to give you Eid as its first stop. And so you have to be very intentional with what you're doing. And sometimes when it's generating pictures of people, it can almost verge on like the caricature or like give very stereotypical like dress. And so just be aware of those equity concerns. You want to be representing folks in your environment, but you also want to make sure that those people are not being made into like caricatures, I suppose. So with students, critical media literacy is huge. We live in an age of intense, misinformation and disinformation attempts, and just people making things that they think are funny. Like I'm sure most of you have seen the image of the Pope floating around with the Balenciaga jacket, right? And that I think that person I was just trying to make something funny, right? So when we go into spaces and we're asked to like teach students about digital citizenship, this has become a core piece of our talk, like where we're talking about, fact checking, Carl Sagan called it the baloney detector, right? Checking the facts, and just an awareness of how social media algorithms work. So a couple of things that get really great results, especially when you're talking with the older students, is I show them this, the first annual charity concrete eating contest, and the kids are like, "Whoa, what? How do they, how do they not die?" And like, are they really eating it? I was like, "Well, that's what the picture shows, right?" And so they have a big discussion about it, and they're trying to figure out like, what happened, how did this cement um, not harden in their stomachs, and then we say, yeah, this is all fake, like these are all just like fake images of folks, um, and then they are, yeah, a lot of them are like wowed, and then you get a few grade eights who are like, "I knew it all the time, I knew this wasn't real," right? But they didn't mention that early on. The other thing I show them is like actually, a screenshot I took from Instagram. My wife's birthday was coming up, and I was looking for like charcuterie board ideas. And then like for the next week, all I was getting was just like, um, I was just getting constantly bombarded with images and reels of charcuterie boards. And so I think that when you're able to like kind of show students that like this actually happens and this is when it actually happens. The last time I spoke to a group on this, it was like a grade 5 group, and they were saying, yeah, like I was looking up a hockey thing, and then everything was like hockey related. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly kind of how it works, because the internet says, hey, you wanted this, you probably want more of it. And so it just opens up the fire hose on you. So, where that leaves us is, a lot of doom and gloom, but what's the good news? Well, the good news is that our current best practices are a strong defense against AI driven dishonesty and misuse. In our board, the Indigenous education is a huge piece, and also human rights policy. And so the great thing about this as well is that it kind of aligns. So rarely in education do you get something that like manages to fit into a bunch of different categories, but this would be one of them. So as we spoke earlier with that graphic from Hastings and Prince Edward, um, ChatGPT excels with written products, and so we need to really think, really think about, how do we triangulate that data? Can we use conversation? Can we use observation? And if you have given the student a product-based assessment, like an essay or something like that, the next question is, okay, how can I be sure the student did it? And the logical step is to talk to them about it, right? We want to be having those conversations. One of my coworkers said, if the first time you see a student's work is when they're passing in the final thing, then you kind of missed a lot of valuable opportunities to provide formative feedback throughout the process, right? And so we also want to be thinking about that process over product piece. Sometimes you may need to rethink how students demonstrate their knowledge, like those Q&As. They just are probably not as reliable as they used to be. Now the other thing too, and I'm guilty of kind of the ego piece myself, but like sometimes we get in this idea that if they didn't learn it from me, it's not valid. And one thing I'm trying to remind folks is like, would you say that about a book, right? Like if you had a student, if you taught a class on, I don't know, synonyms, right? And then the student didn't get it, and then they read a book and they got it, like, would you be like, oh, my feelings? Or would you say, oh, I'm glad you got it, right? And so the idea is like, if they're getting it from an AI and it's accurate and they've internalized that knowledge, I'm like, personally, I'm not offended by that, and I'm not really threatened by that. In fact, I kind of think that's a great use of the tool, and I'm glad that the student kind of internalized a new piece of knowledge. One thing in that digital citizenship piece, though, of course, is that you got to remind students, hey, a lot of this stuff is just made up. Like the AI will hallucinate and make things up all the time. So, engaging with conversations is not just good practice in terms of assessment, but it is also a great way of yielding better insight into their thinking and their learning and ability to apply it, especially like in things like art. I'm thinking where students have, you know, amazing ideas up here, but then the mechanics of actually drawing or painting or whatever, they're kind of thwarted by that, right? And so having those conversations with the student can really kind of give you a lot of deep insight into their process. You know, how do you know this? What questions do you have about it? How would you find those out? What would happen if? You know, why was your thesis statement what important to you? What were some other thesis statements that you kind of bounced around, right, for your older students? And so, you know, if a student can't answer any of those questions, there's a pretty good indication that they don't know it. And whether they had an AI do it or had great Aunt Mildred do it, doesn't really matter, right? They haven't internalized it. We recommend folks to create opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding to you and their classmates. And that might mean creating artifacts, oral presentations, Q&A, all that sort of thing. And the key piece of the Q&A being like it's live, it's interactive, right? So that you can see the student, you know, responding to that. Okay, and so I have a couple questions for you, and you can just react with an emoji. Um, so we're going to talk about UDL for a little bit. Now, I don't know if I'll see the emojis on here or not. I'm just going to trust in the Zoom that I will. So I'm going to say a few statements, and if you could just give me a thumbs up if it applies to you. Okay. So my first statement is I prefer to use subtitles when I watch TV. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple subtitles. Fantastic. I hate watching trailers for movies, even movies I want to see. Okay, I give myself a thumbs for like for me, like I see a trailer, I'm like I don't want any spoilers. I don't want any. What about I like creating things? Okay. I only read paper books. Okay, some thumbs down. When I send a message, I use talk to text. Okay. I'm not very good at drawing. Okay. I get a lot of information from documentaries. Okay. And last one, I hate listening to podcasts. Okay, the room was exactly as I'd hoped it would be, with a variety of different reaction to this. So that's exactly what I was hoping. Um, you know, for myself, uh, like I like subtitles. I don't like the trailers. Um, the paper books I can like I like actually like an ebook because I can do it at night. All this to say, we all consume and prefer information delivered in different methods. I find, you know, audiobooks to be tremendously difficult in podcasts. I can't, like, from an auditory perspective, I can't process it, and I find that when I am doing something like that, like I find I have to continually go back and like, oh, I missed the last 15 seconds. I kind of zoned out or something, right? But I know that for a lot of people, you know, podcasts are a fantastic way of consuming information. So our biggest recommendation for how to deal with all of this is UDL, so Universal Design for Learning. And if you're unfamiliar with it, don't be worried. It's you know, it's not something that the whole world's been holding out on you. But there are lots of movements being made in this direction. And so the idea of UDL is there's a few core tenets, and those would be multiple means of expression, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of representation. And so those ways that you are consuming information, those are different means of engagement, right? And different ways for people to represent that information as well. So the other core tenet would be to leverage student strengths and remove barriers. So when you are, the D in UDL is to design. And so the idea is that you're thinking about these barriers in advance of actually providing the learning task or the material for the students. So you're going to remove those barriers before they even exist. So the typical thing that people kind of conflate differentiated instruction with UDL, and both of them have their place. But the difference being that differentiated instruction is more like this student has a barrier, how do we react to it, versus designing the task with that barrier out of the picture in the first place. Now, differentiated instruction still has a very, very important role in the education system. The like if you had a student who's working at a grade 2 level and you teach a grade 5 class, you're not going to open up that option for everybody to be working at the grade 2 level. So that differentiated instruction is really important. But the idea with UDL is that we are really trying to think about what barriers exist in my classroom and how can I remove them before they even become an issue. So this little chart is just something that I threw together just as a quick visual guide for folks who are kind of thinking about, okay, I'm trying to create something. What might that look like through a UDL lens? So multiple means of representation. So, do you have like a visual option? Do you have a tactile option? Do you have an auditory option? Multiple means of expression. Is the student going to create a slideshow? Are they going to draw a really great piece of art? Are they going to make a movie? We use a video editor called WeVideo. It's phenomenal. I don't know if anybody else uses it, but like students like have created like amazing piece of work. One group made this really cool documentary, and they were interviewing like politicians from the municipal all the way up to the federal level, and it was just like mind-blowingly good. Multiple means of engagement. So it might be like teacher, but it might like direct instruction, but you might also record a video for your students to refer to, or like, group work. Thinking about accessibility from the get-go, and of course, providing clear instructions and clear supports for your students throughout the whole process. Okay. And that the support might be scaffolding, right? Or it might be like, being available for questions. And again, you might have a little like video tutorial where, students are able to look at common misconceptions before they have them. When we are communicating this to the system, because we don't know where people are on the continuum of UDL adoption, this is one of the slides that we've used. Initially, we started doing like, tell us like, what do you know about UDL? But we were like, well, they're at the workshop because they want to learn about it. So we just kind of changed the entry point, right? So that was a barrier that we noticed to participation. And so we just changed the entry point so that folks could like, a lot of people could, relate to the idea of best book. If I wanted to make even, open up even more, I might say, book, TV series, or movie that you've consumed recently, I suppose. And you'll find that in sessions like this they kind of default to the discuss with a partner. I have not seen anyone act it out. I have not, regrettably, seen anyone do an interpretive dance about UDL, but I'm hoping that someday that will happen. But just the kind of the point that, this is a choice board, right? And so we've built in choices for people to take a look at. Again, they will tend to default to the discuss with a partner, but I have not done this activity yet where people did not participate, which is more than I can say for a lot of activities that happen in a staff meeting. Thanks, Anthony. I think it's an awesome option too. But nobody ever takes me up on it. So like, but they're all engaged. They're all participating, right? And then they want to share what they've been reading. for better or for worse, depending on what they've been reading. But yeah, like please feel free to use something similar to this if you're kind of communicating stuff about UDL to your staff. It seems to work pretty well, and it kind of gives people the gist of it in a very short amount of time. So be aware that choice is good, but only up to a certain point. So too much choice can be counterproductive and can lead to like choice overload. Um, that's when people are overwhelmed with too many options. And in those situations, students tend to default to safe and familiar choices over, taking ones where they can take a risk. And of course, the higher the stakes of the assignment, the more likely they are to default to their comfort zone and do something that they're used to. Um, Choice overload starts to be increasingly more prevalent after six choices. So our recommendation for people is to do six, give students up to six options. And you don't have to do six options all the time. Maybe it's three options, right? But we say, no more than six. If you want, you can include one like some other method, something that you want to do, so that students say, hey, you know what, I really like working with my hands. Could I make a model of this? And you say, okay, sure. Like, as long as you meet the expectations. So the other thing that is kind of was one of my concerns initially was like, well, what if a student just makes Google Slides all the time? And in the book that I'm going to show you in just a moment, the author's just like, you know what, like it's okay that like eventually they're gonna get tired of doing Google Slides and they're gonna try to do something else. You may also want to give you make an option. If you find like students are always doing the same thing, just don't put it on the choice board. You can still put some other method, and if they come up to you and say, can I do a Google Slide? Sure. But if you don't put it up there from the choose from, they may like say, okay, these are some things that I can look at instead. But basically the idea is, you know, we don't want to focus so much on the vehicle. We want to focus on the destination. And so, if students are taking different vehicles or even the same route all the time, are they getting at the destinations? Are they getting where we want to be? That's one of the key questions. So Katie Novak is the like probably the kind of lead person on UDL stuff. And her book UDL Now is the one I just kind of referenced. She's got a flow chart on where are you in UDL implementation. I'm going to pop that into the chat, and you're able to download that if you like. And so it's really cool. We didn't love the fact that the you've got yes and no, and each time you go to no, it's like you're not quite there yet, which is validating, I suppose. But I kind of think that it needs to be, it could be streamlined a bit. At least with the no, it will tell you like what your next steps are, so that you can check off that section. So like, for example, this one, it's a much longer flow chart, but it's like, do students have the options of the methods and materials they'll use to learn the content and or skills? For example, through multiple means: books, digital tools, teacher instruction, collaboration, etc., multiple scaffolds, exemplars, reference sheets, peer review, rubrics, and tech materials, for example, assistive technology. Okay. And if not, you want to be providing multiple pathways to meet firm goals through multiple methods. So you have your firm goal, you have what your students want them to learn and demonstrate, and then you don't want them to get there through a one size fits all method. Hey, if you've created an assignment and every single person chooses the same option, that's not a problem either. But that's probably not going to be the case, for the same reason that some of you like podcasts and I really don't like them, right? So we just all have our preferences of what works well for us, and what works well for me just doesn't work well for everybody else. In terms of multiple means of expression, this is when I was teaching grade 4. I love grade 4 social studies in Ontario because we talk about early civilizations. And I started kind of doing this assignment, and it was UDL before I knew what UDL was. and it was just like the first year I did it, it was like a bit of a risk, and it worked so well. I just kept doing it. It became the highlight of my year. And so the idea was that students would compare three early civilizations based on something they found interesting, and then in addition to like sort of a written component, they would do a creative component. And so the creative component was like sort of wide open, and just had to demonstrate that they learned about their preferred topic. And so these are some of the really awesome things that I got and I held on to over the years. This one right here, that was my first year, and I had a student come in with a 200 slide PowerPoint deck, um, and and it was like set up like a choose your own adventure. And so you could take a fledgling Mesopotamia to regional dominance, I suppose, through inventing writing, going to war, like that sort of thing. And so as you jumped around, he would intersperse these like little tidbits about Mesopotamia and Sumeria, and it's just really really cool. The other thing, we had lots of students do videos, and this GIF was part of a video that a student made. We had a student do like dioramas. This student made she was really interested in medicine, and she made like a plague doll where this poor doll was afflicted with all these sort of historical ailments. And so when we let students, demonstrate their knowledge in a way that makes sense to them, the results can be really, really cool. And I really urge folks to like try it out, because once you kind of get over that anxiety about whether or not it's going to work, if you provide the supports for them, they're going to be able to, meet your expectations for sure. UDL and AI are a natural combo. It was in the chat, and I think it was Nancy. I'm not sure. Sorry, Nancy. Choice boards. Oh, you anticipated what I was going to say. They're a natural pairing. They work really well together. Basically, you can say something like the expectation that you're trying to assess. And then say I'm looking for 6 choices for a summative task, UDL principles, and then it will say, okay, try a drama sketch, try this, yada yada yada, and it'll create that. So for our folks who are still having trouble wrapping their heads around like what can they do, I always did essays. Now we can have this tool that will allow them to brainstorm and generate ideas on what that might look like. The great thing about it is UDL is an enemy for AI misuse, but AI is a great tool for creating UDL stuff. So it's a really kind of one-way friendship, which is why I call them frenemies. You can also, of course, and I'm sure this is not anything new to any of you, but you can ask for like help you create the assessments, whether that looks like success criteria, a single point rubric, or like a traditional rubric. I'm not sure what the adoption of single point rubric looks like in your districts, but we've noticed that there seems to be a bit of an uptick in it, where people just put their core expectations there, and then whether students meet it or don't, that's kind of listed like that. So my son's in grade 1, and his teacher frequently employs single use rubrics, and as a parent, I find it a lot easier to follow and to see where I need to support my child. And so, when people are concerned about it being more work, I always try to tell them it could be more work, but it could also it could be less work, and it could be different work too, right? So if you've created your assessment tool in such a way that it can accommodate a plague doll and a board game and a video game and a movie, then you're kind of lucky, because you get to watch all these really cool things, and you use the same tool to grade all of them. So you have your key expectations that you're looking for, and then away you go with your assessment. Okay, so further reading. So the UDL Now is the book that I referenced. And this website, and we're kind of running out of time, so I will not be able to show it to you right now, but I am going to put it in the chat. The Learner Variability Navigator is such a cool website. So basically, what it does is it lists a bunch of factors related to student success. So, for example, it might say like sleep needs, right? And so as you look at the factors, it can give you background information on what those factors are. But then there's also a strategy section, and you can kind of like check off the things in your class that are an issue. So you might have some students with socioeconomic status needs, some students who have sleep related needs, and it will actually filter a bunch of strategies for you that you can try to use in your classroom. And if you're not sure what those strategies might look like, they've also included, in most cases, a YouTube video that will show you that strategy being used in a classroom. I will caution you, um, unless you have a budget that is astronomical, I would not look at the adaptive lighting one, because they did that one was from Sweden, and the administrator is like, yes, well, we noticed that students had some trouble with their alertness, so when they come into school, the lighting is set to a warm temperature and a dim lighting, and then throughout the morning it proceeds to become more intense and higher temperature or whatever, to make them more alert. And I'm like, yeah, if we all had $1 billion to invest in like adaptive lighting, sure, but for the most part, most of them are not like that. There are little demonstrations of it happening in the classroom, and it's very very useful. Okay, key takeaways as we're wrapping up. So while generative AI brings with it some troubling concerns, many of us are dealing with the same concerns. I think that's kind of the impression that I'm getting, is that lots of us are kind of dealing with the same stuff, and so it's great for situations like this where we can kind of compare notes a bit. Validation is critical when you're engaging with people who are justifiably upset with the changing landscape of education. And it allows you to build a team and build rapport so that you're able to tackle those challenges. If we come in adversarial, it's not going to do anyone any good, and it's going to cause a lot of headaches. Look into the big draw post-secondary institutions in your area, and what are they saying about AI. So if you do come up against a lot of people who are like, what about the future? Then you can kind of say, well, this is what this local college or university is saying. UDL is a great tool to minimize the disruption caused by AI, and then harness it as a tool rather than like a disruptor. And it's like the beautiful, rare unicorn of an idea where it just kind of like fills a bunch of niches. It centers student learning. It upholds their human rights. It's more engaging. It allows them to achieve more. And selfishly, it can be more fun for the teacher too when you're, checking out the playing dolls. So yeah, like that is a really key thing. And if you're not too familiar with UDL, that UDL Now book is very accessibly written, and very there's a lot of practical advice in there as well. So my email address is there. I'll put it into the chat in case you want to copy and paste. Please reach out. Just let me know where I know you're from, because I've got a lot of emails. So please make sure you reach out and let me know. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute. If you don't have any questions, we do have a feedback form there, and the conference organizers sure would appreciate it if you left some feedback of that. So thank you all for joining. Hope it was of some use. And yeah, thanks. Looking forward to the rest of the conference. And again, if you have a question, feel free to unmute or jump in. You're all very welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chris. This was great. And the resources, very helpful. So thank you very much.
Awesome. So glad to hear that. Yeah. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference, folks.